Well, good afternoon, everyone, and let me just say thank you all for being here. A special thank you to the organizations who've put this conference together today. You know, we're spending a lot of time down the street dealing with the problem of our economy and getting the American people back to work. Also spending an awful lot of time trying to deal with the budget crisis that we have and this mountain of debt that needs to be resolved. But having said that, there are other things that are important for our country, and it's why I'm here today. I find this conference deeply reassuring. It's a reminder of the people and the values that America can rely on in uncertain times. And I think we're also fortunate, of course, to have some recent history to call on. You know, our leaders were people of resolve. People like Ronald Reagan, people like Lady Thatcher, who quite simply loved freedom. They made their feelings well known, almost a bit contagious, as if no one or no force could stand in their way. When Reagan died, Lady Thatcher eulogized him. Frail but unbowed, the Iron Lady delivered a stirring tribute to a man who fulfilled his mission. She said this, she said, "Others prophesied the decline of the West. He inspired America and its allies with renewed faith in their mission of freedom." So what brings us here today is not just an appreciation of all that Reagan, Thatcher, and those other cold warriors accomplished, but we also remember the things as they were before. It's why I took to my staff, all of my staff, to the movies one time. Yes, in 2004, we were having our annual retreat, and we started the retreat by going to a movie. The movie was Miracle. And in case you haven't seen it, Miracle depicts, with some Hollywood modifications, the story of the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team. Now, we know how the movie ends, a victory against all odds, one that stirred, I think, the nation's pride. But a reason I took my staff there is I wanted them to see how the movie started, not how it ended. And this was a time when the Soviets were thought to be unbeatable in everything, including hockey. The best that we could hope for back then was a coexistence with an evil empire. Challenges were multiplying here at home. We had a dormant economy, a listless government, and just a general state of drift. It was a time that shaped how I viewed my country and its role in our world. And I know the same applies to many people in this room today. 30 years later, the parallels are obvious, though, of course, the world is certainly not the same. The terrorist threat transcends traditional borders. Our staunchest allies around the world are mired in debt. We've got a tough economy, and there are more questions about the extent of America's commitments around the globe. Amid all of this uncertainty, though, the list of countries lining up to fill the void continues to get longer. And on this list, I think we have to include Russia, which over the last 2.5 years has been the beneficiary of American outreach and American engagement. During that time, Russia has continued to expand its physical, political, and economic presence under the guise of what's called their sphere of influence. Now, within Russia, control is the order of the day, with key industries being nationalized, the independent media being repressed, and the loyal opposition beaten and jailed. Russia uses its natural resources as a weapon and plays ball with unstable and dangerous regimes. Soon, well, let's say it this way. In Russia's use of old tools and old thinking, we see nothing short of an attempt to restore Soviet-style power and influence. Russia will officially be led by someone known to harbor intense Soviet nostalgia. Last month, President of Russia announced he's going to step aside for his mentor, Vladimir Putin. And under this arrangement, Putin, who considers the collapse of the Soviet Union, and I quote, the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, and he can stay in power until the middle of the next decade. Less than a year ago, Vice President Biden said this: Medvedev has rested everything on this notion of a reset. Who knows what Putin would do? My guess is he would not have gone there, but maybe. So I think it's only appropriate to ask whether the Obama administration will now reconsider its policy towards Russia. Now, let me be clear here. I'm not here to argue for open conflict or against some productive engagement. There are certainly several areas for potential cooperation between the United States and Russia: counterterrorism, arms control, trade, amongst them. But international cooperation can only be transactional to a point. We cannot sacrifice our values or get away with walling off our interests from our moral imperatives. We can and we should make clear that certain areas are non-negotiable while keeping the door open for cooperation. President Kennedy was right to say, let us never fear to negotiate. But he was also right to preface that remark with, let us never negotiate in fear. That's why the American people deserve a clear, coherent strategy on how we'll engage a resurgent Russia. In the House of Representatives, our Republican majority has a governing agenda that we call our Pledge to America. In the pledge, we made a commitment to listen to the American people and to promote policies, whether it relates to jobs or protecting our homeland, that have their confidence of the American people and represent their values. In the pledge, we said this: we will never apologize for advancing the cause of freedom and democracy around the world, nor will we abandon our historic role of lifting up those who struggle to receive the blessings of liberty. With that in mind, here's a handful of areas the House will be watching in terms of what I'll call the next steps with Russia. Let me start with missile defense. As you know, one of the first red flags about the reset came with the administration's decision to cancel the U.S. missile defense system in Poland and the Czech Republic. The decision was announced on the 70th anniversary of the Soviet invasion of Poland, with little notice given to Warsaw or to Prague. Now, the House has gone on record in favor of prohibiting any agreements that limit our missile defense capabilities unless authorized by Congress or by a new treaty. The House also voted to limit funds for any attempts to share sensitive missile defense technology with the Russians. We'll continue to insist on these restrictions because, frankly, they're just common sense. Russia is also eyeing the administration's assistance in its attempt to enter the World Trade Organization. Now, this would require Congress to approve permanent, normal trade relations with Russia. There are, I think, though, some outstanding commercial issues that have to be addressed. I've seen alarming reports that the administration is leaning on Georgia to acquiesce, even though doing so would likely normalize the boundaries of the Russian occupation of parts of Georgia. The administration should resolve this stalemate in a manner that respects the territorial integrity of Georgia. Then, and only then, will there any movement on the WTO question worth considering. I mentioned Russia's relationship with unstable regimes. The recently uncovered plot to assassinate the Saudi ambassador on U.S. soil is a clear indication that Iran remains a dangerous source of instability. And when it comes to Iran, the administration has a number of tools at its disposal, including UN sanctions, even though they were watered down by the Russians. Russia's response, or lack of a response, to this breach of international law should be telling. We should be doing more to compel the Kremlin to curtail its relationship with Iran particularly related to its nuclear program and to missile technology. The Kremlin is also exploiting its growing energy monopoly, turning on and off the spigot in the Ukraine and Belarus, and increasing Europe's energy dependence on their energy. Meanwhile, much of our own resources remain under lock and key, giving Russia and other countries who are utilizing their resources a decided advantage. Now, the House continues to push for increased domestic energy production. And the link between energy security and national security is getting stronger. And I think we must act to ensure our own energy security. Now, I read that the second phase of the reset, I'll call it Reset 2.0, if you will deal with democracy and human rights. Now, forgive me, but shouldn't these values be at the forefront of America's engagement with any country? Over the years, many ideas, many words, and many leaders have tried to take the place of a little word called freedom. And none have succeeded. Quite a track record, but certainly not the product of inertia or inevitability. When America leads, it gives optimism. It gives hope. When America looks away, it causes confusion and certainly uncertainty. Instead of downplaying Russia's disregard for democratic values and human rights, we should call on them and call them out on it, publicly, forcefully, and frequently. And the United States should insist that Russia reset its own policies. And if those appeals require teeth, the House is ready to approve them. You know, as my first meeting as Speaker with a foreign dignitary was with the Georgian president. And it was certainly by no accident. Not long after that, I met with a group of opposition leaders from Belarus, and I came away thinking one thing: we should be at their backs. Last month, I opened the Parliamentary Forum for Democracy. And yesterday, I met with a young lady from Yemen, who's this year's co-winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Through these exchanges, I've learned firsthand that freedom most inspires those who remember life without it, or knew the way things were before. And what we've learned, President Reagan said not long before he left office, is this: the first objective of the adversaries of freedom is to make free nations question their own faith in freedom. Now, these adversaries, he's continued, want us to, quote, think that adhering to our principles and speaking out against human rights abuses or foreign aggression is somehow an act of belligerence. Well, listen, articulating our values is no act of belligerence, and certainly nothing to be sorry for. It's our duty, one that we accept confidently and gratefully. And I would add, it's the President's duty as well. Over the past 10 years, our country has paid a high price to preserve freedom and liberty in many places around the world. The next 10 years are going to present us with more choices, more challenges. But I'm confident that we will prevail, and I certainly sense the resolve here in this room today. But if it's going to be another American century, we must match the vigilance of those on the front lines in the mission of freedom. Now, I'm talking about our service members, our intelligence professionals, our diplomats, and their families. And I know all of you join me in thanking them. And I know that you also join me in praying for those who aspire to freedom. Now, let us stand with those who stand up to tyranny and aggression, because if America won't lead the way, who will? Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and good luck with the rest of your conference. I appreciate it. Thank you.